There's an interesting thing in terms of expectations in life. And how realistic are your expectations? And I talked about this the other day, that if we just say, for argument's sake, on a scale of 1 to 10, that sex can give people a 10. And again, a lot of people are experiencing it at a 3, and they ought to move up a little bit. But there is a ceiling to it. There is no 11, there is no 12, there is no 13. And you see people trying to get out of it what it doesn't give. And the same thing when we look at a vocation and we say out of 1 to 10, what does the vocation give me? Well, it might give me a 10, but it doesn't give me an 11, a 12, or a 13. It doesn't do it. Well, what's your expectation of a mate? What can they really give you? And if you want to see what people's expectations are, pick up the Sydney newspaper and go to the back where they have the people wanted ads. And I'm looking for a man that wants to spend a lot of money on me, that likes to travel, that'll buy me a Ferrari, that, likes diamonds, and, and is handsome, works out, and hopefully he's won Mr. Universe. And you go through all that kind of stuff. What are people's expectations of marriage? And they're really, really unrealistic. And, of course, I like what they say in India. It was a beautiful ad in India this year when I was there. It was just great. They got this beautiful Indian girl, and she's gazing at this guy kind of lustfully, this handsome Indian fellow that's getting on the subway. And she's gazing at him, and he's gazing back at her, and you can tell something's going on. If it was an American ad, you'd be thinking, well, they're having some kind of fling, this couple. And then the lady speaks, and she says, I have an arranged marriage. I've been married 13 months, 2 weeks, 4 days, and 6 hours. And I just fell in love. I mean, it's really cool. Because the Indians say this, in the West, your marriage starts hot and ends cold, but ours starts cold and ends hot. And then they take this approach to marriage, which says this, there is no such thing as a bad marriage. There's only people doing the wrong thing in a marriage. And that it wouldn't matter who you were married to, if you did the right things, you'd have a happy marriage. Now, everyone I work with there has an arranged marriage. And they really have some beautiful marriages. And so I'm not advocating that you have arranged marriages, that kind of thing. What I am advocating, though, is that if we did the right things, look how we could even be with the person we didn't get to choose. And we could have a right marriage. And what that's done for the Indians is, of course, one of the things I counsel a lot on, disciple a lot on, will be a question for people is about their marriage. That'll be number 1, and number 2 is their vocation. Do you know I never talk about that in the East? Because your marriage and your vocation are fixed. You don't have a choice. So there's not really a huge expectation for your job or your marriage. Or better yet, I might say this, there's not an unrealistic expectation for it. I don't think people want to be miserable in either one, but your job is picked for you. And your mate's picked for you. And so your expectations are more realistic. And that's why in the East, the people are more spiritual, because there's no ceiling to spirituality. So he said, you can move as far as you want. Now, they move in wrong spirits, and they got 300 million gods in India, all of that kind of thing that goes on. They move the wrong way. But the reason they are so spiritually minded and everything centers around spiritual things is because there's no ceiling to it. It's not capped. Well, in the West, what we do is we think there's no ceiling to marriage, but there is a ceiling to our spiritual lives. And the expectations of marriage, to me, are unrealistic. Now, I think a lot of marriages are in the basement, and they need to get out of the basement and get on the first floor, and they need to be standing up here. But I really don't believe there's a second floor, a third floor, a fourth floor, a fifth floor, and you work your way up that way. But instead, we ought to have more of a mindset that says, what I really ultimately want out of life is something that God gives me, not what others give me. And lower expectation in that, and stop trying to get out of people what they can't give us. Does that make sense? and just and looking at that. So one of the things in doing marriage counseling is we look at what's an unreal expectation. Another thing is a choice that we can make every day with our mates, and not just with our mates, but with the people that are around us. And that is, I like this. Betty said to me one day, you know, I knew when you came into the marriage, you brought bags with you. You brought baggage from your past. But I decided instead of focusing on your bags, I would focus on you. And you know, that's a great thing when you know no person according to the flesh. And you know how people get sainted when they die? And what happens is, of course, when you're with a person, there's friction. And then when they die, there's no more friction. You forget the friction and you start to remember the person. And then they get sainted. And I went to a funeral where an alcoholic fellow nobody had ever known him was sober, and you'd have thought Gandhi died. You know, and my dad leans over to me and goes, if this is how they talk about you when you die and you've been an alcoholic your whole life, he said, let's stop at the pub on the way home. And I mean, it was just unbelievable how I just got sainted. Well, there's some legitimacy in that because I don't have that friction anymore. And then there's a separation, and I really remember the person's heart. And so there is a legitimate part of that. And you know, this guy who was the alcoholic, he did provide for his family. He did go to work every day. He wasn't beating anyone. I mean, he had things about him that you could remember. But Paul says this, I'm not going to wait till you die to make you a saint. I'm making you a saint today. And I know no man according to the flesh. And if you know people according to the flesh, you can always be sidetracked because, as Ray talked about personalities the other day, that a carnal person and an unbeliever can express the same flesh. I mean, Hugh Hefner's with naked women in a hot tub, and really he needs ironing more than he needs a hot tub, but he's in the hot tub with these women. But so is Jim Baker. But Jim Baker was a believer and Hugh Hefner isn't. And the thing that's important is that I don't know you according to your flesh, but according to your heart. And start working with your heart. And, you know, a person's heart's revealed in a lot of their misery. So we do that. Here's something I was just thinking about in terms of our own personal growth. And it's just the parable of the sower and the seed. But I also call it a faith cycle because it seems to me that God drops a seed with us, a truth. And then all of a sudden it really sounds good to us, and then it's taken away. And then that truth doesn't go away. I mean, it comes back again. And so I decide to try it, and I'm trampled by the people around me. And then the next thing that happens is it's falling on me, but it's not falling in me. And then finally it falls in me, and he begins to give it the growth. And what I discover as I go through the faith cycle is that he's the one that had to give it the growth. That just a concept and an idea doesn't have life in it unless he brings life to it. And he does that as we go through this cycle. So we can take a simple thing like this. Husbands, love your wives. Well, I'm not going to love her because she doesn't deserve it. Well, husbands, love your wives. Okay, I'm going to give her a kiss. And she said, well, I'm glad you finally grew up. Well, that helped a lot. And so I get trampled. Husbands, love your wife. Well, I know what you're saying, Lord, but I can't do it. And that's when he says, but I can do it. And then all of a sudden the growth begins to come. And we go through kind of a faith cycle with the things that we learn about God as we go on in that. This is a diagram that you have, if you picked them up out there, that we use quite a bit. You saw me use a little bit the other day. I was just using it on the board but not having it here. And that's a diagram called the issue pot. And in that, what we want to do is separate the issues that we're talking about. When you're talking to someone and they're confused, 90% of the time, the confusion comes because they want one answer for all the issues in their life. And they're bringing up several things. And God's working on several areas in your life at one time. And so I gave this example. A woman says this to me: I can't please my husband. He's always critical, so the kids won't listen, and my depression is back. That was one sentence in one breath. And actually out of that, I got 4 different topics. She can't please. How does she handle criticalness? What are her parenting skills, and why is there depression there? And so I look in this pot and I go, well, gee, there's a whole lot of issues in that pot. Let's pull them out and find what God's answers and solutions are for each one of those things, instead of just letting them all be mixed together. And that's another good reason for us taking histories and getting to know a person a little bit, because they come with a presenting problem, and there can be a whole lot of issues going on besides that presenting problem. So I found the issue pot to really be valuable. And even in my own life, when I feel confusion, there's more than one thing going on in me right then that I can take a look at. Dealing with people too, and I'll often explain this to somebody. There are a large number of people, and mainly they're thinkers and doers. A thinker or a doer that falls into this category. But you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There are people that refuse to be led, and they refuse to be pushed. They want to be directed. And you'll know who they are, because as soon as you try to push them in a direction, in their pocket is an invisible rope with an anchor, and it comes out and it drops into the dirt, and they ain't going anywhere. And so you can have a mate like that, and you decide you want to do something, and you tell them that, and they just drop anchor. They're not going. And you can pull all you want. Well, then you can get behind them and start pushing, and they'll drop anchor over here. And they're not going. And so I just use the example that I want Betty to go in a certain way, and I know there's a hidden door over here, and she won't go, so I throw a rope over and get a hold of her and start pulling her, and she'll drop anchor. She's not going. Because there are a good number of people, mainly thinkers and doers, that want to be directed. They don't want to be led or pushed. Now here's what being directed is. I give you the information and let you make a decision. Now somebody has to have the last word, we know that. But I still give you the information, I let you make a decision. One of the things that's very valuable for a couple, and again, we get lazy in our relationships, and insanity is doing the same thing, getting the same results. But we should have, as couples, one day a week, or just a couple of hours together in a week that is safe time, where you can communicate. And you can tell what you don't like about this, and what you thought and what you felt, without a reaction. And so Betty and I started a thing in India where we just sit and lay on the bed and we'd talk. And she didn't have any complaints about me, but I had some things I wanted to bring up. But anyway, you bring that stuff up, and then, any marriage book, doesn't matter, there's 70 million of them, and we just read a page. Most of it we don't agree with, but it's just, in not agreeing with it, you're learning something out of it. You learn more out of disagreement than agreement, And that's why somebody like the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, those people all work for us. They refine us. You learn more out of disagreement than agreement. So we'll read a little something on marriage, and then we'll end it by just reading just a couple of pages out of a fun book like C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters. That's a great one to read if you're married, to do that kind of thing. But to have time together. Well, in that time, if you're married to a thinker or a doer, if you want the very best answer from them, give them the information and say, next week, let's talk about it. So there's 3 places we can go for our holiday this year. We can go here, here, here. Let's talk about that next week. And give them time to think about it and to be able to participate in the decision and to be directed in it instead of just being pushed in it. And so people like being directed. That's just giving the information and letting me make the decision. Now, I'll say this to you, to the women, and you make a faith leap that men don't make. And it's a huge faith leap. We mentioned a little bit the other day, but just to say it one more time, a woman's desire is for a man. And we see women do stupid things to get a man. But again, she's like the dog chasing the car. When she gets it, she doesn't know what to do with it. And so the woman gets the man, and then God says this, now you've got to come under the man. Now, that's just God's order. That doesn't mean anybody's better than the other person. Has anyone in this room ever worked for someone that they knew was stupider than they are? But it's the order of things. You have a head, you have a boss. And I've worked places where there is no boss, and I'd rather work with a bad boss than a place where there is no boss. Because you really have chaos then. And so God has an order of things in the church. He has an order of things in the home. And the order is that somebody's got to be head. Somebody has to have the last word. Well, here's the faith leap for a woman. You wanted the man, and now you got him, and you're under him, and you look up and you see all of his flaws. That's rough, because you know what, guys? When I've worked for people and I didn't like their flaws, I left. I didn't put myself under them. I just didn't do it. If I finally decided that this guy's enough of an idiot, I'm not putting up with it anymore, I just left. And I went. But you're not leaving, women. You're there, you're stuck. And you're stuck with a guy that has flaws. And so what you'll do is you'll keep positioning to get ahead of him and to get the last word. And whoever has the last word had the first word, to come above him, to get ahead of him, so you can have security. Because it makes you feel very, very insecure to have this guy in charge. Here's your faith leap. I don't look at the man, I look at the God behind the man that made the commandment. And know that he made it for me to be happy, and I yield to God. I'm not yielding to the man. You'll go crazy. And so we see that with Sarah and Abraham. I mean, what a wonderful fellow to send his wife off with another guy. I mean, you can't imagine that. And yet, Sarah went because she saw God behind Abraham. It wasn't Abraham. It was because of God that she went. And so, in this faith leap that a woman makes, it's a faith leap to say, I'm going to live under someone with flaws because God's told me to, and somehow God's going to use that and work it all out for my good. And it's no easy thing to be able to do that. When it comes to depression, this is just a little diagram I use often for that. Here's what depression feels like. Have any of you here experienced depression? Anybody here had depression besides me? You know, so you know what it's like. And what I decided it felt like, that I was right on the edge of the ocean with concrete blocks on my feet. And I felt the tide coming in, and I felt the depression overwhelming me. And it is an amazing thing, just the feeling as that tide comes in and in and in. And I made a couple of decisions in the middle of my depression. I wasn't going to make my family wear it. And that I was going to get up and I was going to go to work every day, period. Because here's a huge problem. If we just take a human being, you have human energy units, okay? So you have human energy units, and those human energy units, half of them are used in your mind as you process, as your body works, as you think through things. The other half of those, 50% of them, the other 50% is used physically. What happens is, and this is really a big issue, but you take someone who's having a mental breakdown of any sort, of any kind, and what we do is medicate them, put them in a hospital, and make them inactive. And what that does then is to take the human energy units that were used physically, and they move automatically into the head, and now 100% of them are there, and you're worse than you were before you went in the hospital. And now they got to give you more medication. It just gets worse and worse. I've seen people get better just through hard work. And I had a fellow who, he came to a retreat. He's a real doer, the big guy, and he was on over 60 medications. And he was just shaking, he was shaking. I said, "What is wrong with you?" And he said, "I'm like a dog trying to pass a peach pit," and he's sitting there and he's shaking. I said, "How much medicine are you on?" And he told me he's 60. And I said, "Well, the first thing we'll do is we'll call your doctor and we're going to threaten him with a lawsuit." That's the beginning. Then we're going to a different doctor and get you off of this stuff. And so we got him down to 2 drugs, and I said, "Now, you'll go out of your mind if you don't have a lot of physical activity as you come off these drugs. And so I want you to come up to my cabin and chop wood. And I just want you to get up in the morning, chop wood till nighttime." Well, he chopped himself right into well-being and health and back to being a millionaire again. But I'll tell you what, I'm still burning the wood that guy chopped. I mean, that must have been 7 years ago. I couldn't even find my place for the wood. He was, he was a doer in the amount of chopping. Anyway, so it's not good if depression's overwhelming me to become inactive. It's one of the worst things that I can do is to become inactive. It'll only increase my problem. And so I made the decision I would stay active in my depression. The other thing is that I would stand against it. And all that meant was this. I knew I wasn't moving, and I knew it was coming in like a wave. But here's what I discovered. It would come in right to here, but it never drowned me. And just as it came in, it would leave. And the depression would leave me. And then the depression would come the next day, and then it'd leave me, and then it'd come again, and it'd leave me, and it'd leave me. Do you know what was happening? Just a little bit of the concrete around my feet was getting washed away. And I found that I could move a foot this way, and when the tide came all the way in, it only came to here. And then I just stood there and kept my eyes on him, kept going, kept moving, denying my emotions, which is very hard. It's easy to deny thoughts. You're on the edge of a bridge and you have a thought jump. It's easy to say that's crazy. Or some of you doers have the thought push, and you know that that's crazy. But emotions just can overwhelm you. And I moved a foot this way, and then I moved another foot and another foot and another foot. And now Betty said, "You're not depressed anymore, but you're sure making me depressed." So I moved.
How useful is a diagram like that? I mean, I know grief's a different thing, but depression's a component of grief. How useful is that diagram in dealing with people in grief?
I wouldn't use it in dealing with grief. Because instead, of course, we talked about that. There's several emotions in grief, but God's emotions run on several levels, which is an amazing thing. We're made in His image. So right now He's preparing a place for you in heaven, and He's preparing a place for someone else in hell. Right now He's showing you love and compassion, and then this other person, His wrath is building. He has all those emotions at once. And so one of the things in grief that we tell people is, number one, never let anyone tell you how to grieve. No one. Because we spent a lot of time this week talking about your uniqueness. And to kill your uniqueness by telling me to tell you how to grieve is ridiculous. I've seen women burn their husband's clothes. I've seen women sleep with their husband's clothes. I've seen people that cried, and I've seen people that got up and took a trip. It's the way you grieve and you work things out. And we let it run on several levels because there's a deep grief and a hurt and a pain. If you're not grieving over the loss of your mate, then I really don't want you as a friend. That means that you have nothing invested in that person. So you have a level of grief that you go through. Yet there's a level of joy because if they were suffering and they're with the Lord, there's a level of joy. They don't have to conflict each other. You can have grief and joy at the same time, can't you? And you can have expectation and those kind of things. One of the things, too, is that you deal with is the emotion of false guilt. Now that we're not rubbing against each other, I really should have treated you differently. I should have done this differently. Shoulda. That's ridiculous. If you went back to that, you'd do it again because that's our growth point. We've been talking about that, too. We did rub against each other. It wasn't, we don't have to feel guilty about that. And then we'll say that, of course, with grief, it's going to take time to get over it because the first year it stands on you, you feel crushed. The second year you walk with it, you feel sick. The third year you stand on it. But here's the one statement I despise, which is time heals all wounds. Do you know how much that minimizes the person that you loved? Time heals all wounds. Time will make you forget them. Time, and there's gone with time. That's not true. In fact, pain keeps that person alive in you the rest of your life. And it doesn't have to be an overwhelming pain, but it will keep that person alive in you, and you do stand on the pain, and you have that. And then just the really practical stuff too of grieving, John. When a lady said to me in Fiji, and the Lord sent her to me. I went to see her because her husband, the house had been broken into, and he was killed by 3 Fijians killed him. And she's an old missionary and an elderly woman in her 80s. And she said, I know the Lord's with me, and I know that my husband's in heaven, and I know that he had all of this in his charge. But she goes, you know what? This morning I fell and there wasn't anyone to pick me up. I mean, that's reality too. And going through that. One other thing too about grief is this, that we don't deal with often, is we think about the suffering person and we don't think so much about the caregiver. The caregivers are often totally exhausted at the end of the thing. I mean, completely exhausted, and they're spent. And not a lot of time is spent dealing with that. The other thing is, I like, of course, in the third world, most of the place where I work, if your mate dies, a grandkid comes and moves in with you for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or till they leave. You're never left alone. What we do in the West is all of a sudden you see people you haven't seen for years. It's a big 3-day whirlwind where you're making decisions you don't even... it's just all happening. You know what I'm talking about. And then all of a sudden the people, take the pie that's left over and they're gone. And there you sit in the house all alone. And that's kind of a strange thing for grief to me. One other thing I was going to mention here. Oh, I'll go to this next one. Did that answer your question anyway, John? Thanks. Because sometimes I just keep talking until people give up and go, well, it doesn't matter anymore. he just kept going until who cares. When it comes to your mind, and you all know this, aren't there certain thoughts that you shouldn't go to? Are there certain things in your life, memories, events, and thoughts, that if you go to, you're in trouble? Well, we've learned those things. Now, the glory of God is He delivers every unbeliever in the middle of their sin and in the middle of their problem. And so there's lots of testimonies about some prostitute that went to the hotel and went in the bathroom and somebody left a Gideon Bible and she opened it and she came to Christ. She was delivered in the middle of her sin. The glory of God for a believer is He delivers you before you sin. So there's a big difference. So, like an example of that is a guy said to me, God doesn't help. God just doesn't help. He just doesn't help. I said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I'm a traveling salesman, and I went to a hotel to spend the night, and I said, God, keep me out of trouble. And I went in and sat at the bar, and there was another single woman there, a traveling saleswoman, and I just said, well, God, keep me out of trouble. Don't let me get in trouble. I bought her a beer, and then she bought the next beer, and then I bought the next round. She bought the next one. But he said, every one I bought, I said, keep me out of trouble. And he said, the next thing you know, I find myself walking down the hall holding her hand. But I'm saying, God, keep me out of trouble. Don't let me get in trouble. And he said, then the next thing I know, I'm taking off my clothes and I'm getting in bed saying, God, keep me out of trouble. He says, God doesn't even help. And I mean, a lot of people, that sounds absurd, but a lot of people think that way. And I said, man, God delivers you before, not in. Now, the single saleswomen are there. You knew that, and you booked there. So why don't you book someplace where that's not happening, and then He'll be delivering you before. That's when your deliverance comes. And that's really the glory of God for you. Well, the same thing with your mind. He wants to deliver you before your mind goes off the cliff and just spirals out of control. And so you know the places you're not supposed to go. And there's barriers there with flashing red lights saying, look, you've been thinking about that same issue for 30 years, and every time you've thought about it, it's taking you off the cliff. So why are you going there again today? You know, just in a practical way, what is the fruit of doing that, and why would you go do that again and head off the cliff? And because there is over here this point of no return. You remember my story about the house of horrors? You know, and you fall into that. You remember that story? And it was just a roller coaster ride as a kid that they had at the county fair. It only had one roller coaster on it, 2 people in it. And then it had a building you went into. It was just a trailer called the House of Horrors. And when you got in there, paid a quarter and you went in there, and there were some carny guys in there that sprayed water at you and said boo and, you know, put a mop over and did that kind of stuff. Well, I went in there with my friend and I said, look, I bought 4 cans of gold spray paint. So when we go through, I said, I'll spray low and you spray high and we'll paint these carnies. So we went through this thing and got off the thing, and these guys come running out, and it was great because they had big gold stripes right here and a big gold stripe there. We laughed and laughed. And so about an hour later, we went back in, and I didn't realize that just because I couldn't see them, they were in the dark and they could see me. And they knew who did it. And when we went in that time, it really became the House of Horrors. And I mean, they were slugging us. They were hitting us with a broom handle. I came out of there. I was in the front. I came out, and this eye was almost swollen shut because the guy hammered me just straight on. And I turned around and I looked at Clark behind me, and he had a cut right across his head from a broom. And I thought, man, am I happy to get off of this thing. And it just came to a stop. And when we started to get up, and the guy that ran the lever on the roller coaster looked at us and went, gave me one more ride through the House of Horrors. And I mean, we just hunkered down, and they were just beating and beating and beating, and we got out of there and then ran. But you know what? If you want to stay out of the House of Horrors, don't get on the roller coaster. And you know what your roller coasters are. You know what your personal roller coasters are. That point of guilt, that point of failure, that point of could have, should have, could have, all that kind of stuff. Stay out of that thing. One thing, too, just a way of research that you might want to look at sometime is, did we talk about this, a male brain and how it works? Did we say anything about that? Okay. Yeah, well, actually, like I said, let me talk about the male brain. That's the female brain. So you got the male brain. And right here in the front part of your brain is where a man stores worry, doubt, fear, and anxiety. He has those things there in the front of his brain. Men are created to be visually stimulated because intimacy for a man is an active act. It can be a passive act for a woman, but it has to be active for a man. So he's created to be visually stimulated. The day you're walking on the beach with your husband and this woman comes walking by in a gownless evening strap, and he doesn't just do this and then look back, he doesn't have a pulse. You know, something's really wrong with him. And because he's made that way. That's how God made you. We're made to be attracted to women, but to give ourselves to a woman. Okay? And so that there's a big thing. Now, what they've discovered, and you really have to wonder who the university students are that sign up for these tests, but they sign up. And they did research, and they found that during intimacy, women could do calculus. They could do calculus, right? You know, high math. And a man couldn't add 2 plus 2. And so these guys are just there going, you know, and he couldn't get it, you know, it was just gone. And and what they were noticing then is that this analytical part of the brain and where you store these things, there was a glow around there during intimacy that blocks all of that. And that's why sex will destroy Africa. Because I know people there who have 10 wives and they got 30 girlfriends, and that's not enough. And the reason is that in sex, for those moments, they're not poor, they're not hopeless, they're not uneducated, they're not homeless, they don't have kids to worry about, they don't have any of that. They have blocked every bit of that. And I don't know if any of you have ever been like this, but sometimes you're just glad when the day's over. I'm just glad the day is over. I just wanted it to end, and I just want to go to bed and it's over. I'm glad God didn't make one long day, and that we could just go and go, but we actually rest and you get a break from it. And actually, intimacy with a wife is a man's break from all of his worry and fear and anxiety and all of that. And if your husband comes home and he's just been totally beat up from his work and from his environment and from what's happened and everything that's taken place, and he just found out he's getting laid off and all those kind of, one of the best things you do is just grab him by the hand and go rape him. And I'm telling you, it really would, just that act of acceptance, number one, in a rejecting world would have a huge impact on him. The second thing is it blocks all this. Now, the problem is, when people give themselves to another woman, well, while they're doing it, there's this glow around here, and there's no worry, doubt, fear, or any of that. But then, when that's over, and this goes away, you can now just add to this guilt, and self-hatred, and the fear of being found out, and more anxiety, and more depression, and condemnation. There's just a way and a not the way, and it's not the way. So you just add all this stuff to that. And that, of course, is one of the appeals of, and when 80% of the internet is devoted to some type of pornography, it's not devoted to that just because it's devoted to it. That's where the money is. And the money in it is, and that's where I tell fellows, if you want to be delivered from pornography, the deliverance will only come before, it won't come in it. So you might as well just, close your eyes and punch in a password that you can't get on the internet. And when you're in your right mind, because once you get into it, this glow comes and you lose your mind. And so that's one of the things we want people to see that ahead of time. And one of the worst things you could do, and some men are dealing with it this way, is they kill their sexuality. So I have guys who are taking some kind of medication, blood pressure or something, and has to have a side effect that it kills their sex drive. Well, the doctors say you don't need the medication anymore, but they keep taking it because they don't want to have a sex drive to struggle with it. And that's how the church has dealt with it. I mean, they just made it out to be such a, it's the most wicked thing in the world, the sex drive nearly. But there are ways to deal with that. I mean, don't fall into that and be delivered before. We talked about two neuron pathways, and we just have a little diagram about that. And we discussed that, and basically what it is that if you do something twice a day for 30 days, you will develop a neuron pathway that allows you to do repetitive things. And what allows you to do the repetitive thing is a trigger. My father said that he never couldn't understand how anyone could struggle with smoking. He said it's the easiest thing in the world to quit smoking. It's ridiculous for people to talk about not being able to quit smoking. He said, it's so easy I've quit over 400 times. Well, the thing is you quit and the nicotine's out of your system in 48 hours. But the trigger that I smoke in the morning and I smoke in the afternoon and I smoke after lunch, the trigger is still there. And so breakfast launches the neuron pathway, and it starts bouncing up here to lunch and then to the break and then to this and then to supper, and it wants to hit the target. The neuron pathway wants you to go ahead and smoke. And so we've all developed neuron pathways. One of the most pathetic neuron pathways is all you got to do is twice a day for 30 days lay in bed and make a case against your mate. Well, they do this to me and they do that to me and they don't support me with this and they don't listen to me and they did this and they did that and they did this. Do you know you'll get to the point where you can't sleep at night until you do it? Till you go through that? Till you repeat everything that's wrong with that person? That's pathetic. And so the way you change a neuron pathway is, of course, with triggers, because the trigger is what really is causing it to go. So when you lay in bed at night and you're so used to saying, I'm worthless, I'm a failure, I'm stupid, I'm not going anywhere, let that trigger, a new neuron pathway, which says he's my life and he's my hope and he's my endurance and he's my joy. You do that twice a day for 30 days and you'll find you can't go to sleep at night without reciting to yourself what he is for you and what he is your life. And I like the way science just keeps proving, set your mind on the things above. Whatever is true and right and pure and lovely, let your mind dwell on those things. Just some of these diagrams might look kind of odd or weird, or why in the world do we even use them? But I was only doing this to describe why people cuss, why they curse. And here's a real interesting thing they've discovered about the brain, is that there's two places that you store words. And one place you store words here, and what confines those words, the wall behind the words, the wall that holds the words in place in your brain, is definition. And so all these words have a definition with them. And so if I'm thinking about my thinking, I want to get out that door, then I'm going to use the word go because I'm going to go. I'm going to use the word leave, I'm going to leave. That word has a definition. When I say I'm leaving, you know what I mean, right? I'm going. So I have words, and I've built a vocabulary here in this part of my brain of words that have definition, and they don't come out unless I need them according to their definition. So if I'm going, I don't say I'm going to stay. Well, I'm staying and then I leave. I don't do that. Those words are confined by this. Now, words that are associated with frustration have no boundaries around them. And so they are not bound. Frustrating words are not tied to definitions. And so, for example, all of a sudden, I drop a brick on my foot. Oh, shit. What does that have to do with a brick? What's that have to do with my foot? It has nothing to do with it. It's a word associated with frustration. And it can be, those words come on all kinds of levels, but just saying, well, good gosh, all fish hooks. Well, what's that got to do with it? It's your word that's associated with frustration. We all have words that are associated with frustration. And here's one of the main reasons I was just looking at this, is that you see the sweet old saints in the nursing home cursing. And you never thought you'd hear anything like that come out of Grandma's mouth. And all that tells me is that sweet old saint is laying there in bed very, very frustrated and angry. Because they can't take care of themselves, and they have to have their diaper changed, and they can't move, and they're miserable, and they've had control their whole life, and they don't have any control. And their frustration just has these words kicking off of the mountaintop here. And just coming, and we need to really be careful and say, look, that's not really describing their heart because it doesn't have a definition with it. It's just frustration for them, and that's all. It's not really defining them, and they didn't become something strange, and in their old age. One of the things we talked about too is that a lot of people are praying that God would make them a bipolar manic depressive. And that's what a one-time fix does. My emotions are at the bottom, so could you please send me up here and get them up to the top as fast as I can. And that's what happens. People come to you and they feel bad and they want to feel good right away. But you know what? If you go up right away, you'll come down right away. And so God's method of taking you up is slowly like the threads of a screw. And he works slowly, so when you happen to have a hiccup, it's not throw up, you just come down a thread. You don't just come up and down. God's way of working in my life is often just very slowly. It's where I'm just climbing up and going up that way with it. Another thing about the flesh is this to understand. The flesh is flesh, and the flesh is hostile to God. If you've ever had horses, and you leave the corral open, it's not just the black horse that'll leave, but the white horse will leave too. They'll all leave. And it doesn't matter. All it takes is one to lead. And if you've had horses, you know that. One leads and they all go. And it doesn't matter if it's the white horse that leads or the black horse that leads. The good deeds of the flesh will eventually release the bad deeds of the flesh. And so it doesn't matter what it is. And here's something, just test me on this. If you spend 10 minutes thinking about how bad you are and how terrible you are and what's wrong with you, within another 20 minutes, you'll be thinking about how terrible someone else is. Just test me. And if you're thinking about how terrible someone else is, within 15 minutes, you'll be thinking about how terrible you are. And I sit there and I go, you know what? I can't go there, because if I start thinking about how terrible I am, I'll be thinking about how terrible someone else is. If I'm judging them and criticizing them, I'll be judging and criticizing myself. Just test me on it. It's an absolute. You do it and you get to the place where you go, wait a minute, I'm setting my mind on the things above. That's what I'm going to do, and not the things below, because I can't afford it. I really can't afford to be critical of you. I can't afford to be judging you. I just can't do that, because I know that the flip side of that is I'll be hammering myself. And I can't afford to hammer myself, because I'll be hammering you. And so we let one out, and the other one comes out with it. Sometimes you'll meet people and they'll say, and they've been in an abusive situation, and so they've gotten away from their mate, and they'll say, they tell me they've changed and they tell me they want me to come back. Well, how do you know when someone's manipulating or they really mean it? Because what a lot of people do is they react instead of respond. So I had a girl who was living with a guy, and he was beating her, and I kept telling her, you have to get out of that, you have to get out of that. She wouldn't listen. Finally, one day she came in and she goes, I've got to get out of it. And I said, thank you. And she said, well, we're having dinner tonight, and we're going to be in a restaurant. And so after dinner and before dessert comes, I'm telling him that I'm leaving, because I know he's not going to hit me or do anything in there. And I'll have my stuff in my car because we're meeting there, and then I'm not going home with him. I said, that's a beautiful plan. Do that. So they have dinner. They're waiting for dessert. She leans forward and he says, just a minute, I want to tell you something. He goes, we're breaking up. I want nothing to do with you. Now, wouldn't you think she'd be relieved? Guess what she said? Don't go. Please don't go. Don't go. What did I do? Can't we work it out? Because people react to rejection instead of responding to the facts. It's almost a gut thing just to react to the rejection and not respond to the facts. And so when you've got somebody who's been very, very abusive, and all of a sudden, you just say, listen, we need to take a break from each other. I'm not against separation, but I want separation to have a goal, and that goal is restoration. And a lot of people offer separation as the first step to divorce. So we're saying, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, how do you say, if you're a woman and you've been abused, how do you know this guy's really changed? Well, a manipulator has a goal, and his goal is to get you back, say, whatever the goal of a manipulator is, whatever they want out of you. And even people at work and around you, we're surrounded with manipulators. And to get their goal, a manipulator will spend a lot of time with you, and 95% of the time he's telling you the positives about yourself and maybe 5% of the negatives. Here's how you find out if someone's manipulating you to do something and they haven't really changed. Just say no. Just say no to their goal. Now, if he's not a manipulator, here's what he'll say. I understand. I have said things to you I shouldn't have said. I've been rude to you in a way I shouldn't have been. I've never wanted to work through things with you before. I wouldn't trust me either, and I want you to take the time that you need. And I'm going to continue to move on, and you keep moving on in the Lord, and we'll see what happens. Now, that'd be the right response, because he's taking responsibility for where he's at. that would be the right thing. But when you say no and he's a manipulator, what he'll do is he'll spend less time with you, and 95% of that time he'll, like that, start talking about what's wrong with you. So it's 95% what's wrong, and it's 5% what's right with you. And so just manipulate. And then all you got to do to really find out if they're manipulators, say no again. And now they'll spend very little time with you, and all they'll ever do when they're with you is condemn you. Because they were pushing you to that goal. Anybody experience that in this room with a manipulator? Had that kind of stuff happen to you? So it's just to help people. These are just odd diagrams that we use. We're about done here too. I like to just to ask people who are in the midst of spiritual abuse, and there's a lot of that takes on because people will use your good heart for the Lord. And here's an amazing thing. The first thing the enemy does to you when you become a Christian is he uses the bad deeds of the flesh to sidetrack you. He uses the flesh. But do you know, as you continue to move on, he'll use your good heart to sidetrack you. And like somebody will say this to me, this is a good example of the enemy's been whispering to him. Well, I would take the Bible study, but I'm afraid I'd be doing it for my own glory. Well, you know how much work there is in a Bible study and how nerve-wracking it is and nail-biting it is and all that for your own glory. I mean, you're not doing it for your own glory. You'd be doing it because of God. But see, the enemy's using the good desire of your heart that you don't want to take glory to keep you from doing something you ought to be doing. And so I just ask people in their system and in their faith and how they're walking and the fellowship they're in, there's a motivation to act in every system. And what is being used to motivate you to act? Is it compassion? Is it grace and love and life and forgiveness and mercy that's motivating you to act? Because that is the Christian faith. But are you being spiritually abused? And spiritual abuse comes when I want you to act because of the fear of judgment and punishment and guilt and fear and condemnation and out of comparison. And you can ask yourself at the end of a sermon, did I hear a religious sermon or did I hear a faith sermon? Because how am I being motivated? And it also comes to how am I motivating my children when I want them to act in a certain way? How am I motivating those that I'm discipling? How am I motivating my mate? That kind of thing. You ever wonder, I mean, it just some of the things go through your mind, but you ever wonder why, I mean, it's just kind of odd that you have such an intimate walk with God and everyone else in this room has one too. It's like he's a polygamist. You know, I mean, you're just trying to sort all that out. Like, how can he be so close to me and so near and so everything, but he's so close and near and everything to you too? I mean, what's he running around like that for? Shouldn't it just be me? And I mean, how does all that work? And how are we all connected to him? And here's a neat thing to me. Do you know that what you have is you have a supercomputer? And you'd understand that. What a supercomputer does is it's linked to several other minor computers. And so they're linked together. And when this computer needs something, it calls on the supercomputer and it sends it to it. And so it gets it. So the supercomputer's never focused on just one of these terminals, but it's connected to many terminals. And whenever there's a need, it comes. Now, the reason that's all possible is the fact of the connection. And so the fact of the connection has to be there in order for the terminal to recognize the supercomputer and the supercomputer to recognize it. So here's an interesting thing. Think of your left big toe. You thinking of it? You feel it? You haven't thought about it all week, have you? Poor little guy's been down there all alone, suffocating. Thought I was going to drown a couple of times. You didn't care about it. No, there's a toe down there. There's my left toe. It's just down there, my left toe. But you know what? The fact that it's connected means that you could just now recognize it. Now here's a beautiful thing. The fact that I'm connected to Him is more important than the recognition that I am. Because of that fact, I can call on Him at any moment, and He's there like that. Because of the fact of the connection. And now I know what it is to pray without ceasing. It's the recognition of the fact of a connection. And here's what prayer without ceasing looks like. It looks like this. I have never seen a parrot like that. An amazing parrot. Saw something like that in the Amazon, but I never saw a parrot quite like that. Lord, I know my son's really struggling with his job. I want your will to be done in his life in that job. Man, a three-wheeled motorcycle. I've never seen a three-wheeled motorcycle. I wouldn't mind having a three-wheeled motorcycle. I wonder how those wheels, if those wheels twist. Or I don't know what they do or not. Lord, it's just great that Hannah's pregnant. And I'm going to have another little grandbaby to play with. And it's just going to be great. And just put on Hannah's heart to name the boy Mike. and do that. You know, one day I am going to try hang gliding. I like hang gliding. I mean, it looks kind of dangerous, but I think it can be fun. I might have Betty try it first and just see how it goes. Well, I'm going to try hang gliding. And then it's back, well, Lord, come and be my life today in my words, my teaching. And see, what I'm doing is I'm living out of the fact of a connection and just recognizing it all day long. That is prayer without ceasing. And see, all of you are connected too, and that's why after you leave here, in the middle of the night sometime, you'll be walking to the toilet and you'll think about Mike. And you go, why am I thinking about Mike? It's the middle of the night and I'm going to the toilet. Why am I thinking about Mike? It's because we're all connected to the super terminal, and it's the middle of the night for you, but it's the middle of the day for me somewhere around the world. And God has put me on your heart that you would pray for me, that I would make clear this wonderful message, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And so we pray. And that's why my prayer life's so simple. Because I have the fact of a connection. And all I need is I can send information this way, and He can send information this way. And so my information this way is, Lord, I'm so sick right now, I don't think I can get up and go. And then He sends out a little thing over here to you that says, why don't you pray for Mike today? Because I'm inviting you to participate in what I'm going to do for Mike, which is giving him the strength to get through it. And it's a very, very easy way to live. Think of your left big toe. You already forgot him, didn't you? You forgot all about him again. There he is, down there all alone. Could you at least tonight trim him up a little? Make him look a little bit better, give him a little bit of attention. And see, we just go back. The fact of the connection. And that brings about a recognition. Another thing we'll look at here. Of course, we already mentioned this. It's just a diagram that I use, just looking at the Christian caste system, that we don't believe in that or buy that, and have the ideal. The ideal is Christ in me, the hope of glory. It's not well-adjusted flesh. And so we have people moving up and down that. We already looked at this one. This is one I use a lot with students, and actually anybody that's over 19 or 20. But the thing for me is, as a campus minister, when I did that work, is that I made it very clear to the students, at your age, you are not dating to have fun. You are dating to find a mate. And that's why you date, is to find a mate. Now, the way that works usually is that there's an attraction that's God-given through an accidental meeting. You know, you just meet somebody and there's an attraction. And then you meet them again and there's more of an attraction. You talk a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's planned meetings, because I knew what classes Betty had after I'd met her for about 2 weeks. So I was always outside. I just happened to be outside the class, and there she was. Well, hey, Betty, what are you doing? So I just said, well, how'd you get here? I'm just walking, and there you were. And, been out there waiting and waiting and waiting. And then what you do is you begin to start having communication together, and you talk about deeper issues of life and where you're at and what you're doing with the Lord and that kind of thing. Now, at this midpoint right here, I would say to the students, listen, if you decide to cross over this line, you're headed toward marriage. And so that's the line. There's a line there that you can cross. Because once you cross over that line, you'll start showing physical acceptance, and you'll start planning for the future, and you need to do counseling, and you need to look forward, and you need to look at marriage and see what's going on. You've stepped over that line. Now here's the reason I make that point, is that if you're both not willing to step over the line, minimize the damage and everybody back off now and go your own way. Because if you step over that line, there's going to be a lot of pain. And also I expect honesty at this point, because what will happen is, say, the guy will step over the line and the girl doesn't want to step over the line. And so what he starts doing is pulling her up there. And he starts dragging her up here into a situation she doesn't want to be in. And then, of course, she's going up here, and let's just say she's got a 5% doubt about the relationship, or she's got a 50% doubt. Do you know when you get up here and you start having problems, that 50% or 5% doubt becomes 100% doubt. And doubt will wreck you. And doubt will be used by the enemy. So I just say minimize. Look, if you're both not ready to step over, then let's just call the thing quits right now. The problem I'm having today, of course, is that people start with sex and then come to see me. And then they expect me somehow to build this foundation under what should have been the ending point, and they've made it the beginning point. And the one lady, I really respect her. Her husband died. She's sweet inside and outside, and she's just really a nice gal. But her husband died, and he owned a company, and she got the insurance. The company was so, I mean, she had plenty of money and everything. She's pretty and all that kind of stuff. But more than all that, she really loves the Lord. And she would never date anybody very long without bringing them to my office so we could do some just pre-dating counseling. And she wanted to know what I'd think about a guy. And so she dated a guy for about a year, and she decided that it just wasn't the right guy for her. And so she told him, and it was really cool, because I was there. She told him, she said, listen, I don't want to go over that line with you. And I don't want to lie to you and make you think that I do. I don't. And I'm not saying that you're defective and something's wrong with you or anything else. I just don't have the peace of God about it, and I don't want to go over that line. And so we need to end it all. And he looks at her and he says, how in the world can you do that to me? We've been dating for a year. We've been doing stuff together. We've been praying together. We've been out sharing. We've done different crusade stuff together. We've done all kinds of things together. How in the world can you do that? And she said, it's hard to do it because I honestly like you. But if you want to know why I can do it, here's why. I never slept with you. Because if I would have slept with you, I wouldn't be able to do this right now. And I thought that was great. And I thought, boy, I wish a lot of people could hear that. Because there's a netting and a guilt and all that other stuff that comes together with that have people making decisions that they really shouldn't be making at all.